All right, this is kind of an inside baseball look at Georgia, real quick. And for decades, there was this discussion of the early 80s and that being the glory years for the Dogs. And there's just a lot of truth to that, okay? But uh, that went away. I mean, that went away after 1983. Georgia, to recap, won the national championship and the Sugar Bowl in 1980. Um, Played for, in a way, the national championship in 1981. They would have needed Clemson to lose, and they would have had to beat Pitt, and which neither of those things happened. Then they played again for the national championship in 1982 against Penn State, lost that game, and then blocked Texas from winning the national championship in the Cotton Bowl after the 1983 season. That was probably Vince's best game that just like job that he did. If that was Vince's best game, like the Missouri game in 2014 for Mark Richt was his. Jim Donovan's was probably 1997 against Florida, although 1996 against Auburn was a pretty big deal too. But we can go through all that some other time. The point is, the early 1980s were as much about Herschel Walker's, you know, putting Georgia on a different level than anything else. Let's just be intellectually honest. As good as those teams were, and they were really good, and they had very good defenses. They had an extremely athletic, an uber athletic quarterback in Buck. They had, guys that were really gifted like Lindsey Scott. They were not as deep as Georgia is now. They do. I mean, Kirby is a better head coach. Um, yeah, athletic department is far more sophisticated and advanced now. The state has tripled in size. There are more players, and the recruiting is not even close to what it was at the time in terms of where Georgia is. You have to remember, coming into the 1980s season, Georgia had come off a losing season. Georgia hasn't come off a losing season since 2010. I mean, they were 6-7 that year. That's the only time in the life of the players on this program that Georgia's had a losing season. Okay, so the time was different. Also, Georgia was not, frankly, Georgia was a regional power in the early 1980s. They're certainly not a regional power right now, as you can read about in Double Dogs. Listen, uh, we're gonna have the biggest thing about this is the behind the scenes stuff in the Ohio State game, okay, as well as some of the behind the scenes stuff that you're going to get that you're not going to read anywhere else. I know the other folks that do the books, they do a great job. They're just regurgitating the game stories from that. So it's just like you're picking it up. You're not getting anything new. You're getting stuff that you're not going to read anywhere else. You're going to get images you're not going to read anywhere else. If you already got Dogstruction, you cannot be without Double Dogs. And a lot of y'all have already done that. And many of you who are ordering right now, you're ordering both at the same time, which is smart. Okay. Picking up Double Dogs today ensures that you will get it quicker than everybody else. Make sure you're picking it up today. It's going to be sold only at Red Zone in Athens. So when we get it delivered, when it's written and all this stuff, see, that's the other thing about the other books that people have done a great. Don't These people are my friends, but it's not the same. They're just regurgitating the stuff. Okay, we're giving you new insight that you're not going to read anywhere else. I can assure you, you're not going to read anywhere else. So pick that up today. When you think about, the romantification, if that's a word, of the time of the early 1980s with Georgia has been seared into the memory of Georgia folks. Why? Because it was a glorious time for the Dogs. You had the play with Lindsey Scott. It was an amazing play that ensured, the national championship was still alive against your arch rival in Jacksonville and everything that goes along with that. I mean, it's hard to write a story that has more, you know, Georgia about it. Larry Munson's call was beyond epic, okay? But it's not the same, as it is now. I mean, Georgia is there. Alabama was really good in the 1970s. They had a amazing run in winning multiple national championships in the 70s under Bear. They were exceptional. They were not as good as they have been in the last 10 years. I mean, Alabama in the 1970s did not win 6 national championships or whatever it was in, however many years. It just didn't happen. So I'm going to look this up as we go. But Nick is better than Bear was. He just is. And when you look at national championships at Alabama, how many did they win in the 70s? They won 3. They won 1973, 1978, 1979. So Bama had done the back-to-back. And of course, they didn't win a national championship. They won 1 national championship from 1978 or 1980 until Nick arrived. Alabama won 1 national championship, and that was in 1992, an exceptional team from Gene Stallings. The SEC didn't control the universe like they do now. And so what Georgia's doing now is more impressive. It just is. The story of Stetson, ain't no doubt. The story of Stetson Bennett, you can put it right there with Herschel. I mean, you can. And people are going to go, well, I mean, think about it, y'all. I mean, they come from different situations, no question. Obviously, there's a few things about them that are the same. Small towns, etc. That's where it ends. I mean, physical. I mean, there's no one that could compare to what Herschel was at that moment in college football history. Stetson's was the total opposite of that. He doesn't belong, and like all the odds that he had to fight to get there and so forth. But after a while, I mean, it was pretty clear he was an exceptional quarterback. But it wasn't just about Stetson Bennett. I mean, the Stetson haters, of which I've never been a part of, they will admonish you if you don't talk about how good Georgia's defense was during this time. Well, Georgia's defense was really good in the early 80s as well. Not as good as this. I mean, Georgia wasn't sending 15 guys to the NFL. So don't get confused about where we're really at here. I mean, if you wanted to see what the glory years are like, open your eyes because you're living it. And that's not going to be Georgia's last national championship. I don't think so. They're too good. Not only are they too good, they are too interested in winning. And what I mean by that is Georgia is too interested as an institution to people knew this was going to happen. Now, some of it was naive, but people knew this was going to happen. They had the state legislature changing laws to help Kirby. Now, of course, that doesn't really matter if we're being honest, and those of you who are elected officials know that, but they did it anyway. There's the fundraising at Georgia is beyond belief. So this is a different time. Things are far more serious now. It was never like this in the 80s. I was there. It wasn't like this. Okay. And for all the romance I mean, I remember the 1982 Clemson Georgia game. It was a huge event. I was there. It was the first time, Georgia had lights in the stadium in like decades. ABC. It was Labor Day weekend. The last 2 national champions. All this stuff. That game was huge. It wasn't as big as Tennessee Georgia this year. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I don't know how many people watched the ABC presentation of Georgia Tennessee. I mean, excuse me, of Georgia Clemson, but it wasn't the audience of Georgia Tennessee of over 10 million people because college football is a bigger deal now. College football is a bigger deal. You win now matters more than any other time in college football because the 70s and the 80s, it's hard to really distinguish between the two, okay, in terms of how big college football was. It got put on rocket fuel in the 90s. The late 80s was when it sort of started doing that. It was the decision by Penn State, Georgia, and Oklahoma to sue the NCAA. in 1984. Only then, after that, 5, 6 years later, did we see the ramification of that decision. And everything from that moment on has exploded. And college football is only going to get bigger, only going to get bigger. And that's why what we're living through right now at Georgia and what we just saw at Alabama, that Georgia's 2 year run here, or however many year run, is bigger than anything Florida's ever put together. It's bigger than almost anything anybody's put together, with the exception of Alabama this past decade and USC in the early 2000s. It's bigger than Nebraska and what they did in the 90s. Why? Because people watch it now more than ever before. It is in everyone's bedroom, living room. It is on their cell phones all the time. So you cannot compare what we are currently going through with what we went through in the 1980s. It's just not the same. I will add this. I will add this. And this is just, let's fast forward from 1983 to 1983 to 10 years later, 1994. Kirby Smart signed at Georgia. Kirby Smart would never see the field at Georgia now. He knows it. We all know it. And that's okay. I'm not judging that. He would never see the field now. That's how much better they are. You cannot compare these two situations. They are incomparable, uncomparable, whatever the word is. Pick up double dogs today.